Resuming debate, the honourable member for Cowichan-Malahat-Langfrod.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And before I begin, I just want to thank my honourable Liberal colleague for splitting his time with me. Although we're probably going to be taking some different approaches on our, on our views of Bill C-15. Now, Bill C-15, Budget Implementation Bill, I guess I've heard some Liberal members of Parliament say it's where the rubber meets the road for a government's budgetary policy. And, you know, in the NDP, we have examined some aspects of Bill C-15, and we do agree that there are some positive measures that the NDP has fought for. So we will acknowledge that there are some good things in this bill. But it is nowhere near what the Liberals promised, and it is not what is necessary to strengthen our economy and combat inequality. For example, some of the major things that I campaigned on and that I received feedback on from my constituents were childcare spaces. It's one thing to increase the child benefit, but when families are struggling to even find spaces or they've got wait lists that go on longer than a year, that's not really going to help a two-income family try to find that space so that one parent can have the time to have freedom and find work. The other major glaring omission comes with unemployment insurance or employment insurance. There was a real opportunity in this bill to make some profound changes to the Employment Insurance Act to how it operates for Canadians on an equal basis from coast to coast to coast, and that's what was lacking. So in conclusion of my introduction, Mr. Speaker, we will be opposing Bill C-15 because of its content, but also because of the fact that it is an omnibus bill. Now, I feel that the Liberal government has kind of studied a few conservative tactics from the previous government. You know, this bill has been rushed through. We've had time allocation. The committee meetings that were held were also rushed. So we have an act here that spans 179 pages. It changes over 30 different statutes that fall under 9 different ministries. And there are a few things that we argued should have been split off to give proper study. But the committee, when it was studying Bill C-15, had 6 meetings, only 2 had witnesses, and the amendments that were proposed by the opposition were all rejected. You know, the Liberal government makes a big deal about how they reach across the aisle, they want the opposition to work with them. But when over 35 amendments are proposed by the opposition and all of them are rejected by the Liberal government, I don't see that as working together. And it brings to mind this quote from the movie Jerry Maguire, "Help me help you." If you want the opposition to truly work with you, then I think some deference has to be paid to the propositions we are putting forward, and not to have them rejected out of hand. So that's a few of the reasons. The time to adequately review the different components of this legislation. You know, I remember when the Liberals, when they were in opposition and on the campaign trail, they kept on talking about how undemocratic omnibus bills were. And, you know, they said during the campaign they would not resort to legislative tricks to avoid the scrutiny of their bills. Well, I think we'll see the history of the previous 6 months shows completely the opposite. They promised to change the standing orders of this House to bring an end to this undemocratic process of omnibus bills. I just truly feel that if we are going to take an omnibus bill that is changing a few different pieces of legislation, it has to be given the proper time and scrutiny. I believe all Canadians and expert witnesses deserve to have their say in things like this. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'll devote a little bit of time just going over a few of the good things, with a caveat. There will be a few criticisms as well. You know, we proposed, the NDP proposed in the last Parliament that we would remove taxes on feminine hygiene products, and because that costs women $36 million a year. So we are happy to see that mentioned in the bill. We are also very happy to see the Liberals recommit to returning the old age security and GIS eligibility back to age 65. But, you know, I heard my previous colleague in the Liberal Party talk about the GIS and what a wonderful thing it is that the GIS has been increased by 10%. Well, let me just provide a little bit more factual basis to that claim. The Guaranteed Income Supplement is going to be increased for people in the income range of $4,600 to $8,400. So if you are $4,600 of income per year or less, you get an increase of $947 per year, which is less than $100 per month. And these benefits of the GIS will be phased out completely by $8,400. So rather than increasing the GIS by 10% across the board for every senior who's eligible for it, you are actually targeting a very narrow bandwidth. And I think it's important to illustrate that fact because it gets lost in all of the hyperbole about how great the Liberal government is and they're helping our low-income seniors. Always read the fine print, Mr. Speaker. Now, I also am happy to see that the government has committed to enhancing the Canada Pension Plan. We believe that this pension model it survived the recession very well. It's a model for the world to see how well managed a pension fund can be. And our interest is making sure that every worker who pays into the CPP can retire with an adequate income. One of the biggest broken promises comes with small businesses. You know, page 10 of the Liberal fiscal plan in the 2015 election specifically mentioned that they were going to reduce the small business tax rate to 9% from the current 11%. And not going ahead with this reduction is going to cost the small business sector $2.2 billion. It's going to be $125 million in the next fiscal year, $475 million in the year after that, $770 million by 2019-20, and $825 million by 2021. This is according to both the Finance Ministry and the Parliamentary Budget Officer. Like, what am I supposed to tell, Mr. Speaker, the entrepreneurs in my riding when I tell them, well, there were personal income tax cuts, and it means that income earners in my range are going to get a reduction, but small business owners are not going to see that. And furthermore, small business owners usually pay themselves a very small amount of money to keep their business afloat. So they're not even going to, they're getting hit twice. Their business rate is not going to be reduced, and their personal income tax rates are not going to be affected. And I think that is a shameful broken promise. The other thing, too, you know, C-15 incorporates, it swallows what was Bill C-12 that had to deal with veterans. And, you know, we were happy to see the changes in C-12. We agree with them. But we believe that C-12 had to incorporate, or had to have become a standalone bill so that we could have examined the changes, proposed different changes to see how we could have made it better. By swallowing C-12 into C-15, again, omnibus legislation, avoiding proper scrutiny. And I would say, Mr. Speaker, that this Liberal government's record with veterans right now is absolutely shameful. They have broken a solemn promise that was made in the campaign. They agreed in the previous Parliament on the election campaign that the government has a sacred obligation, a social covenant, and now this government is taking them to court. So, you know, I would just like to see some firm action to actually stand up for our veterans for once and not use them as campaign props to get votes.
That's right.
Now, in terms of some of the employment insurance, you know, I suggested to the Minister of Employment that, you know, one of the great things the Liberals could do was to take the Employment Insurance Fund and set it up as a standalone fund so that it would be protected from future governments raiding it. Because right now, those premiums paid by workers in the event that they might get unemployed one day simply gets rated as a cash cow. And it would, I think it would set something up very meaningful for workers if we put that up as a standalone fund. Again, no significant action on that, and we still have an employment insurance system where 6 out of 10 Canadians will not qualify. To help my Liberal colleagues understand why we oppose this bill, I think it's always helpful to read quotes that Liberals have given in the past. And the current Minister of Public Services and Procurement and the Member of Parliament for Bonavista, Burr and Trinity said something in 2014 that really sums it up. She said, "There is so much contained in this omnibus budget bill that it really does not give parliamentarians the opportunity they need to act on behalf of the people they represent. We do not get to scrutinize the legislation, and at the end of the day, we end up voting for a bill that we have little time to digest." I couldn't have said it better myself, Mr. Speaker, and I'll end there. Thank you.
Questions and comments? Question commentaire. The honourable member for St. John Rothsay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I thank my colleague opposite for his great and passionate speech about C-15 and our budget. But Mr. Speaker, the party opposite at times confuses me because what I hear now from the party opposite is that we need to spend more on this and more on that. We didn't spend enough on this and we didn't spend enough on that. Mr. Speaker, their campaign was run on austerity and budget cutbacks and budget controls. And I think, Mr. Speaker, and I certainly saw this door-to-door during the election campaign, is that voters were absolutely confused as to where the ND party actually stood. Some said they went so far right they were actually left. I'm not sure where they were, but my question to the member opposite is this. Can he please explain the $15 a day daycare policy that the party opposite put forth and how they were actually going to implement that when there was already provinces that said they weren't going to agree to it? Thank you.
The honourable member for Cowichan-Malahat-Langfrod.
I'm very happy to answer that question, Mr. Speaker. Of course, that was going to be a conversation that we had with the provinces. And as to how we would pay for our program, well, what he lacks in understanding is that the $15 a day child care program, by allowing more parents to enter the workforce, you broaden your tax base. It's very simple economics. The other thing, too, Mr. Speaker, is in terms of how we paid for our budget in a whole, the Liberals have refused to touch the corporate tax rate. They've refused to tackle tax loopholes. And as a result, we are stuck in this trickle-down economics. There is so much dead money sloshing around in corporate bank accounts, something that has been explained by Mark Carney, the former governor of the Bank of Canada. The Liberals did nothing for that. So they're not helping the job creators of Canada, the small businesses. They are not touching corporate tax rates. And as a result, we get a $30 billion deficit because I don't think the proper areas of fiscal management have been looked at properly.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Sarnia-Lambton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the honourable member for his speech. And when he was talking about broken promises, I started to reflect on all the broken promises, from the not holding the deficit to $10 billion, the cost-neutral middle-class income tax, the home delivery, and I just wondered if the member could comment on which broken promises he's most disappointed in.
The member for Cowichan-Malahat-Langfrod.
Mr. Speaker, I might have to request an additional 10-minute speech to go through that list. For me, I think the number one thing, I've always had a very strong connection with the veterans in my riding, and I think that broken promise in the court system was a big one. But in terms of the real reforms on employment insurance, I think this budget was a very real opportunity to get something meaningful done. By making sure that there was a common threshold no matter what part of Canada you lived in, and that we had a fund that was protected very much in the way that the Canada Pension Plan Fund is. This would have insured governments against future unemployment shocks, and it would have given all workers the peace of mind knowing that there's a fund, a dedicated fund that will always be there for you, and it's not disappearing into the Consolidated Revenue Fund. Thank you.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Timmins, James Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When we ask ourselves who serves our country, there's people like from my region, blue-collar people who went to Afghanistan, who served over in Croatia and Bosnia, and they came back, and there is a trust that they will be treated with respect. And when I see how the Prime Minister used the veterans as props and made all manner of promises on their pensions and then turned his back on them and is fighting in court, I find that unconscionable. And for the families that I represent who are being denied their basic pensions and the services that they are entitled to because they were used as an election prop, I find that simply unconscionable. I'd like to ask my honourable colleague what he thinks about the breach of faith with the veterans in our country.
Honourable member for Cowichan-Malahat-Langfrod.
Well, Mr. Speaker, when solemn promises like that are broken, it gives all MPs a bad name because people start saying, well, we just can't trust politicians. We put our faith in you and you broke it. And you know, Mr. Speaker, in our previous constituency week, I sat down with a veteran from Afghanistan, and this poor man was quivering with rage and tears because he firmly believed the Liberals were going to honor that promise, and then they end up taking them to court. I think it's just a despicable 180-degree turn, and I hope the government finds it within itself to reverse that changes, to give instructions to the government lawyers to stop the shameful practice of taking our veterans to court.
Resuming debate, the